Hi, YouTubers, and welcome back to yet another It's Not That Difficult episode and the garage rebuild. Last time we were putting up the first wall. This time, I will speed things up a bit and show you how I built the other three walls. Some special attention will need to be placed on the door opening on the left that holds the drop beam on this side of the building. The window here and the garage door opening in front, and finally the post on the right side that holds the drop beam here. So the drop beam connects the left and right walls and ultimately holds all the ceiling joists as well as the center of the roof. Taking a closer look at the beam schedule, we get the exact dimensions for the drop beam that we need to use, as well as the information on the material, how the beams are connected to the frame, as well as any other relevant information. Quick side note, I actually opted for adding a strong tie ECCQ66 over the door as well. That's not needed, but I felt it to be easier to connect in this way. Here the detail on how the drop beam sits over the door opening on the left wall. Looking at the alternate condition drawing. It's important that the beam rests on the header. That means, as you will see later, that the actual rough opening of the door is framed below and not topped by this header. The point is that the weight gets transferred from the drop beam through the header to the posts downward. And here the other side. This one is a bit easier. Just have to make sure it's set centered on that right wall and it's lower than the top of the second top plate by about 4 5/8 inches per the beam schedule. And then finally, again, in order to properly support the load coming from the roof, instead of separate headers for the front window and door, there is one continuous header in place here. Again, right under the top plate to take the load from above. So the rough openings will be below that. And off we go. Here I'm marking on, then cutting out the slots for the bearing plates. By the way, I ended up making this piece 3 times. Again, I'm not a professional. Also, I switched to a router at some point because the saw just gave me too much trouble. Here I'm realizing that it's much easier to place the studs if I mark them on the side of the plate rather than on top of it. I guess I should have just believed the framers I watched. The reason for the 2 studs close to each other here is that at 16 on center, the stud would have been right on top of the anchor, so I did one on each side instead. This is the header over the door, or at least part of it. This is about the time that I realized that the bottom and the top plate don't line up properly. It took me about half an hour to figure out that this was because of the concrete wall bows in the center of the wall in the front and the back of the garage. So there's actually roughly 1 inch more space on that left wall front to back compared to the center of the garage. Here I'm filling in the rest of the header. I didn't pay attention when I bought the header since the plans assumed 2x4 construction. So I had to sandwich a header to bring it to the by 6 dimension. Here you can also see where I doubled up studs. This is due to the shear wall requirements where the edge of each plywood panel must land on a full stud. If you're wondering why I don't put in the blocks between the doorposts and the adjacent studs, it's because I thought ahead and realized I wouldn't have enough space to nail the header against the studs and mount the hardware properly because of the small space left here. You'll see later how I handled that. And this is how I built the platforms for the 55-gallon drums that are the counterweights for the walls when braced up. They will be filled with water, at least about 2/3 full. It's time to raise this wall. The good news is that this time I could split the wall in half, since I didn't connect the header just yet. I just figured this would make our lives so much easier, and it sure did. Here's the reason I didn't put the blocks in earlier. Just removed some temporary nails up top, bent the studs out of the way, and was able to nail everything in place very easily. As I mentioned in the beginning, the rough opening is not topped by the header, so adding some cripples below to form out the door opening. On to the next wall, and I'm starting with the post in the center of the wall that holds up the drop beam. These are again the shear wall double studs, as explained before. If you look on the top here, you see that the top plate isn't flush with the post and the studs. That's because this is just temporary. I designed the top and bottom plates to have about 4 feet overlap in this case. So the bottom plate is longer for this wall segment, and the top plate will be longer for the next wall section. This way, they are immediately tied together. Unfortunately, I didn't capture how we put up this wall. It interestingly turned out to be the heaviest wall so far. We needed 4 people to lift it up and get it positioned. By the way, this was the only wall that I was able to stand up by myself, apart from the tiny corner wall piece you'll see next. Now you see how these two walls nicely tie together. finally putting the strong tie post to beam connector on. I'm sanding off some of the edges on the post since the weld on the connector makes the bottom of it not sit flush on the post otherwise. Now, in order to properly nail the post and the king stud together, I bent the California corner stud out of the way. I only realized later that by doing that, I broke the bottom plate along the line there and had to replace it. Final wall segment. This wall was probably the most complicated of them all. There are 3 hold downs, 3 posts with attached studs, for proper spacing as well as the window opening to be taken into account. Plus making sure that the rough opening for the window is correct while being centered on this wall between the posts. So you see me with my cheat sheet. You may be wondering why there is no top plate in the rough layout of this wall. It's because of the header that goes across the window and the garage door. It requires the posts toward the middle of the wall to be shortened for that amount. I did again resort to temporary plates in order to put the wall in place, ready for the header beam to go in. Just before we put up the last wall and the beams, I put in the strong tie header to beam connector that I mentioned in the beginning, cutting the opening in the top plates to size for that. And so here it is, 3 strong men to stand up this final wall section. I mean, how many engineers do you need to stand up a wall? I had to rent a 10-inch circular saw in order to be able to cut the header and the beam to the right size. Just in case you're wondering, one of those beams weighs in the order of about 400 pounds. Precision engineering. So that's it. All outer walls are up, and the header and the drop beam are placed. A ton of thanks to my good friends Risto and Peter. Without you, this would not have been possible. Next time, I'll be starting with the shear walls and we'll start diving into building out the roof. If you like the series so far, or have questions or comments about anything I'm doing, please leave a comment below. Or just leave a comment anyways. Until then, please visit our Instagram page for more frequent updates. Please also like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell button to get notified as soon as new clip gets posted. See you all soon.